Hello, everyone. I see we've got folks trickling in. Welcome. Fantastic. So it looks like we've got a good group. I'll kick us off here. Let another couple folks come in, but want to start on time. So hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to join us. My name is Haley Wallishin, a product marketing manager at LivaNova, and I'll be moderating our conversation today. Just to start us off, wanted to thank our partners at AMSECT for helping host this important discussion, and of course, our two wonderful speakers who will be sharing their insights and experiences with us over the next hour. We have attendees from all over the globe on today, which I think is very exciting and really just a testament to how valuable these types of forums are as the perfusion community grows and as we look to continually improve patient care strategies. Just some housekeeping items. As you all get joined in here, we will be recording this webinar, and we do have a Q&A function down at the bottom. If you do have questions or thoughts, feedback, feel free to drop them in, and we will address them towards the end of the webinar after our speakers' presentations. And then we do have Alexa on as well. If you have any technical questions, she's happy to help, and you can funnel those through the Q&A as well. So just a little bit of level setting. Over the next few minutes, our speakers, Lori DeJoy and Dr. Rob Baker, will go through their experiences building quality-driven perfusion programs. So talking about how they use data, how they use technology really to support their clinical decision-making and clinical efficiency. As I mentioned towards the end, after their presentations, we'll open it up for about 15, 20 minutes of open question and answer. So again, feel free to share those in the chat and let us know what's top of mind for you. So just to introduce our panelist here, Lori DeJoy. Lori is a certified clinical perfusionist with over 10 years of experience. She was most recently the adult team manager at MUSC for 3 years. She's a published researcher with a focus on goal-directed perfusion, and her work bridges the gap between research, practice, and team-based innovation. She recently joined LivaNova as an account executive in South Carolina. And Dr. Rob Baker is the Director of Cardiothoracic Surgery Research, Quality and Outcomes Unit at Flinders Medical Center. Rob has worked locally, nationally, and internationally to achieve better outcomes for patients undergoing cardiac surgery through clinical and perfusion practice. Rob established and chaired the Australian-New Zealand Collaborative Perfusion Registry, which he will speak about today, and was co-chair of a multidisciplinary perfusion task force, created guideline papers for clinical practice. His work and that of his department have been recognized internationally as well. And so with our speakers introduced, I'll start us off just with sharing some important safety information about the Essence Perfusion System, which will be referenced periodically throughout this webinar. And just to lay the foundation, as you all know when you signed up, the title of this webinar is From Data to Decisions, Practical Approaches to Developing Perfusion Quality Initiatives. The word practical is really operative here. In recent conversations that we've had across the perfusion community at conferences, online forums, and more, consistent questions have come up about really how do you apply the concepts beyond thinking about quality initiatives and really bring those to reality. So these key questions here, the why, the how, the who, really were the main topics that we asked our speakers to think about and present on. So why they've prioritized quality initiatives, how they select and implement certain goals, who's involved across the cardiac care team, where technology plays a role, and really what the future looks like for quality-driven perfusion. So with that said, I will pass it over to Lori to start us off here.
Thank you, Haley. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about how we have implemented Essence and a quality program at MUSC. There we go. Sorry, there's a lag on the mouse. So I'm going to start off with my first why. I am a science person by nature. I grew up loving biology. I was a marine biologist before I became a perfusionist. And one of the things I've always asked is why? Why do we do certain things? Why do we do them a certain way? And whenever I started perfusion school, this was one of my big things. I learned you have patients and you keep their MAPs within a certain range and their blood pressure in a certain range. But why do we do that? And do we treat every patient the same? So one of the things that came out during my schooling was the first module for Connect for the LivaNova brand. So I was like, this is kind of cool. You kind of see the numbers of your patient and you focus on those things versus going, okay, everyone fits in this box. Everyone should be a map between these ranges. So that started me down the path of looking into my research project, which was goal-directed perfusion and goal-directed therapy throughout history. So I've taken that same thing through my past 10 years of perfusion, and I still ask the same whys today. So some of our clinical goals at MUSC, we in 2024 were paper charting. Our capabilities of looking at patient data were, hey, let's look at this paper chart, go back, review the numbers. If we want to do anything with it, we can put it into an Excel sheet. But we were severely lacking in the data side and the technology side of things. So we sat down and we came up with some goals and we said, what do we want to do? Well, we really want to have some type of way to capture our perfusion data with or without EMR capabilities. So it'd be nice to take all that data, put it into something where we can analyze it and see how we're doing. We also wanted to work on standardizing our protocols and performance for both perfusionists and students. We have a school and we have 30 students every year. So making sure that we were doing the best we could for our patients and as perfusionists while teaching the next generation of perfusionists was important to us. We also wanted to improve our patient outcomes. That's something that drives us every single day. We're very, goal-oriented in making sure that we decrease our morbidity, mortality, et cetera, with our patients. And we wanted to make sure that we had this in real-time situations so that we could see how we were doing, not just after the case, but during the case. So some of the the benefits of goal-directed perfusion, and these have been shown in various studies along the way, but they're things that we find very important, is you have the reduced risk of AKI, reduced neurological risks, better pulmonary outcomes, the improvement of blood conservation, and the decreased lengths of stay, which, as you know, are becoming more and more important in hospital as far as quality. So these are some of the parameters we look at MUSC. And these are based on literature, perfusion input, as well as surgeon preferences. So what we start with here is we have a target of greater than 300 mils per minute per meter squared for DO2I. And that's something over history has been 262, 272, et cetera. Our goal is 300 based on the most recent research, and our surgeons and perfusionists find this to be a nice, happy place to be. Our SVO2 target greater than 75%. Lactates, we look at lactates less than 3. So that's another indicator of tissue perfusion. Our hematocrits less than 21%. That is more of a surgeon request than it is based on actual data, just to be completely transparent with that one. And then we look at our cerebral stats and our flows and pressures. The nice thing about all of these numbers is that they are interrelated. So whenever we have one of these values that goes out of range, we can say, doctor, we have an issue here. Our lactate is 3.5. And they say, okay, well, what's your DO2? Or what's your hematocrit? Or what are your cerebral stats based on where you started? And from that, we can make decisions during surgery to do the best for our patients, which is really helpful, and they are open to those communications. So these are some of our numbers from 2024 before we had the Essence pump in place. This is paper charting and using an S5. And I think this stands to be a testament of how focused we are on patient care and trying to do better every day for our patients. So as you can see from the chart here, based on the 2024 STS benchmarks as well as NUSC, in our LVAD program, as far as dialysis and strokes, we were better than the national average. Heart transplant, dialysis greater than 30 days, we are within the normal range based on the STS benchmarks. And then cabbages and valves for acute renal failure and stroke, we are actually better. So my update to this is in 2025, we are actually 3 stars for cabbages, which I think is a nice shout out to us because we keep continuing to improve in our patient care. So once we got these in place, we actually got so much more data than just looking at paper, which is amazing. The nice thing here is that on this screen over to your left, we have the regular monitoring screen. You have your patient parameters up here at the top, and then down the side, you have some additional parameters. The nice thing is that you can add a bunch of different values up top and scroll through this so you can see what's going on. Over here on the side, you have patient information as well as timers, and then all of your checklists down here, which is a wealth of extra knowledge compared to what we had to start with. On the right side, we have a goal-directed perfusion screen, which gives you more information. You can drill down into it. I would like to say that in this, you can see that there is some data missing. We are still in the process of implementing, but the nice thing is that you can actually get this data without being fully integrated. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. One of the things I would like you to notice is on this left side, if you look closely by the check mark, you can see the yellow dot. Can you guys see my pointer? Is that? No.
Right. Yep.
Oh, I can see that one. Thank you. So that's the important thing I wanted to highlight as far as talking about the next slide. So through that, remember the yellow dot, we'll come back to it. One of the extra things we can do with this EPM and the Essence pump is that we can look at our DO2 area under the curve, which I think is very important. There are other researchers that find it important as well, but they say that the time spent below the threshold equals a greater oxygen debt. And we all know that the greater area under the curve is linked to a greater AKI risk. So this machine program actually gives you capabilities to see what's going on in real time. So the yellow dot on the other page, we can actually click on that and we can go into this threshold management list, which I find really helpful. So you can see all the different things that are in here, all the list of stuff. And this is Dave Fitzgerald's case, which he gave me permission to use all of his information. He was my guinea pig. But if you look in here, you can see that there is an area under the curve time period, and it's about 15 seconds. And we can go over to the side and we can look at a timestamp and we can say, okay, well, what happened at this time? We can also go back and look at our timestamps on when we were on bypass, when the cross clamp went on, et cetera. And we can tell from this that when the cross clamp went on, we were down for 15 seconds. That matches with this area under the curve, which I find super helpful. So we can link those back to why did this happen? What was the cause? How can we improve that? So our path forward, these are the phases that we had everything rolled out nice and pretty and helpful. Phase 1, procurement and rollout. That one seems so simple. You buy the pumps, you put them in place. Procurement for us took almost a year. So it's a labor of love. It's worth, fighting for, putting the effort in, making administration aware of why these things are important, because sometimes they go, oh, well, you're doing your job just fine. Why do you need this? The rollout part of this was actually the easiest part for us. We were S5 users before. Everyone was really excited about getting these into the OR, and it wasn't an issue of, oh my goodness, I'm scared to do this. Everyone did their modules. Everyone was on board. Everyone was like, yes, we want this. We are currently in phase about 1.3. Just to give you an idea of where we are. IT hasn't started their side of things yet, but we are working towards phase 2 right now, which is retrospective reviews and quality tracking. That's something we can still do without being fully integrated into the OR and with IT. And then phase 3 is obviously integrating with Epic for seamless data flow from the pump into the patient chart, and then communicating with anesthesia. So phase 1 was our rollout. We had 2 perfusionists per case. So one was actually running the pump or driving, as we call it, and the second one was handling charting. During this time, since we're not fully integrated, we did paper charting as well as starting to use the EPM so people could get familiar with checklists, how to actually work it, what they're looking for, etc. We only ran these pumps during daytime hours, and we did no emergency cases on them until everyone said, yeah, we're comfortable. Yeah, we're signed off. We feel like we could do this without parental supervision, if you will. And then we had clinical support. We had 4 weeks of clinical support, which was very helpful. We had 2 people in the OR with us, helping us with anything we had, asking if we had any questions, etc. On the other side of this, we were able to plug and play with the EPM, which was extremely helpful. So we literally transferred from the anesthesia monitor over to the pump, and we were able to collect all the data that you saw on that previous screen. And that's without the network integration. So it's just a transfer of the monitor data over to our side so that we can record it. We're still working out our iStat and HMS integration, but that's hopefully coming soon, as well with the IT integration of everything else. So our next steps forward, our team is actually excited about reviewing cases, seeing how they're doing against themselves and against each other. Of course, we have a very competitive team. They like to do little battles between themselves. Over here on the right side is actually the Golden Oxygenator Award. This is probably the 3rd or 4th iteration of it. They get them for going above and beyond, doing well, clinical exceptionalism, things of that nature. The overall goal of having all this quality review is to empower everyone, to make them feel comfortable, to show that they're doing well, seeing if there are areas of improvement to, engage everyone. And it's definitely not in a punitive way. It's supposed to be to uplift and help. We use the same thing for perfusion students as well, just so that they can see how they're doing, where there's room for improvement, etc. So our overall goal is to build a connected, intelligent perfusion ecosystem for long-term success. And I keep reminding myself that every step forward is progress. It's been a long journey trying to get to the point that we're at now, and we still have a ways to go. I'll be helping in a different capacity now, but I'm excited about the things that are coming forward with MUSC as far as the EPM and their data quality program. And then these are just some quotes that I think are important and go for, patient care and innovation. So innovation is not just about doing something new, it's about doing something better for your patient. And data doesn't save lives, decisions do. But the right data at the right time enables life-saving decisions. Excuse me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lori. Just a reminder, feel free to send your questions in the chat. Rob is going to share his section, and then we'll have about 20 minutes at the end to dive into the questions here.
Thanks very much, Haley. Thanks, Laurie. That was a fantastic presentation, which really opens people's eyes to how we can optimize the new technology that's available to us to deliver better patient care. So that's a really good start for today's webinar. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I'm Rob Baker, as Haley has said. I'm from Adelaide, so it's early morning for me, so if I fall asleep, bear with me, but I'll try and keep awake. Okay, I just have a disclaimer that LeavingOver is supporting my presentation, and I acknowledge both the perfusionists who work at the institutions that I work at and the members of the Australian New Zealand Collaborative Perfusion Registry. I'm going to share some of the data from the registry. As a quick outline, we're going to have a little bit of a look at the historical perspective of where we've come from. And I'll do that in 2 phases, one looking at Flinders Medical Centre and the other looking at it from the registry perspective. So we'll get 2 different windows, if you will, on how we've got to where we are now. And then we'll finish by looking where we're heading at the moment, what we're trying to develop in terms of making data more accessible to more clinicians to make better decisions. Haley put together this slide, and I'm not one that usually takes a slide like this, but this one just had resonance with me in that I felt that, if we looked at the question of taking data and delivering decisions, and sort of compartmentalized it into these subheadings, it sort of helped structure the conversation. So I am going to use that as a little bit of a framework for this conversation. So why? It's a pretty simple question in my mind. Why, as perfusionists, as clinicians, we do anything in our clinical practices. And that's very much to improve the outcomes for our patients, improve the outcomes for the patients and their families, and improve the outcomes for ourselves, for the clinicians involved in the care of those patients. And the natural extension of that is we need to understand not only the outcomes we get, but how we get them, what drives those outcomes. And a way of doing that is by using a quality framework. So, to me, it's a very simple question, why we do quality initiatives. It's always because of the patients that we're trying to serve, because we're always trying to get a better outcome for them. So we want to focus on registering where we've come from. So as I said, I'm going to talk firstly in the space around Flinders Medical Centre. I started in 92 at Flinders when we started the program there, and we developed a registry right from our first case in 1992. So we've been a data-driven unit for a very long time. In 1999, we moved to the S3. Those of you who've been in perfusion for a while will remember the S3 system and the Stockit data management system. For most perfusionists, that was the first entree, if you will, into seeing what we could do with data from the heart-lung machines. And the developmental work with the S3 and the Stockit data management system has gone a long way to underpin where we are currently with the Essence system. We moved in 1999 physically to a new hospital system, into the new hospital. And then a bit over a decade later, we moved to, sorry, I've got out of line there. Oops. There we go. We moved to the new hospital system. And once we got involved with the data management system, we realized how important it was to really investigate what we were doing. And this was one of our first publications, actually. It was written by Jane Ottens, and some of you may have read this paper, looking at automated data collection and comparing it to manual data recording. And Laurie's just shared with us their experience at MUSC from the point of view of looking at electronic data to manual data collection. And we formalised our experience back in this publication. But I think the interesting thing for me looking back at this work was the conclusion that we published in the paper. And we said that its potential, that being automatic data collection, at this time seems limitless, with one major application being the development of real-time feedback for the perfusionist during the case, resulting in a potential change in patient management during bypass. And secondly, the use of collected data for the purpose of quality control. So in a way, that could really summarise the presentation that we've just heard, using the power of the Essence system during the case and then learning from it and improving with the data after the case. So there is a slight lag. Here we go. In 2012, we moved to the S5 and the Connect system. And that was a significant advancement in terms of the data management system. And we found that we're able to integrate more devices in the operating room into the data management system, and gave us a bigger opportunity to collect more information about the procedures as we were going on. And we're just at the phase of transitioning to the Essence system. So, from my perspective, the presentation we've just heard is a lovely segue for us as we move into this next generation of data management and heart-lung machines. And as we focused on registry as an institution, that was underpinned by a focus on wanting to build strong quality assurance and improvement. And I think the cartoons, if you will, that describe continuous or quality improvement programs, and one's shown here with the PDCA acronym: Plan, Do, Check and Act. They're all underpinned by what I consider to be the most important, not necessarily the most important, the part that underpins the ability to do continuous quality improvement and that is measurement and recording of data. So this check what you do, understand by measurement, such that you can actually act and improve. It's definitely the ability to measure gives us an enormous opportunity, both in the quality assurance and the quality improvement space. So looking at how do you select and implement your goals? Well, it's very dependent on what you want to do. In our early experience, we wanted to look at how can we take this electronic data and develop automated pathways to share that data amongst the team. So what we were really looking at in the early phase of our work was how do we create this automatic process? And we highlighted that by saying, okay, the DMS data was there, but what could we do with it? We worked out a method of processing and analysing the DMS data and transferring it into an Access database. And in that transfer process, we were able to create quality metrics. And an example of that might be the time below a mean arterial pressure, or how long your cardiac index was at a certain level, what your saturations were, whatever. And we created rules, and from those rules, we were able to generate a quality control report that was able to come back to the perfusionist after the case and allow them to develop and improve the pathway of care. So that was a good first step. It allowed us to use that electronic data and improve clinical practice. From there, we continued down this pathway. We wanted to work out how we could, I'm trying to think of the right word here, how we could make an overall program, if you will, for our quality improvement work, which would integrate multiple cases. So in the first phase, we're looking at an individual case and feeding that back. Then we wanted to be able to look at collected data. And this paper we wrote back in, I think, 2008 or 2009, we looked at how we go about putting that data together and using statistical code control charts to actually try and understand the processes that were taking place as we did our continuous quality improvement. And in this paper, we looked at three groups, or three time periods actually. One prior to us having quality improvement data, one where we just had the quality improvement data available to us. So this is akin to the first paper that I've shared with you, developing an automated process to get a quality report. And then the third phase was when that report was actually fed back to the group of clinicians, and we could get improvement in that manner. And we were able to show that by feeding back the information, by sharing the information, we were able to get an improvement in practice. And that's ultimately, the whole, I was going to say the whole essence of why we're having this call, but that's a little bit too much of a play on the word essence. But it is why we're here. We want to understand how we can take the data that we see in the operating room. We want to be able to improve the immediate outcome for the patient and the operation that we're doing, but we also need to learn for the future. And so we're really in a fantastic period of time where that's available to us. And then we put all of that into an overall picture of how we wanted to talk and think about implementing change, because it's all very well and good to have the data, see the data, but then ultimately you've got to be able to change your practice and have a robust methodology in place such that you can ensure that your practices are not only evidence-based, um, but you have to understand how your practice compares to that evidence base, continue to review it, continue to report it, and continue to improve. So that was very much what we did at Flinders. In 2006, we established the Australian and New Zealand Collaborative Perfusion Registry, and we wanted to take that model to a much larger group of people so we could impact a wider group of patients, if you will. And that's one of the reasons that the collaboration was originally established. The vision at that time of our group was to empower the entire cardiac surgery team to improve the understanding and practice of bypass, to improve the surgical patient outcomes. And I think to me, that vision's always represented, I guess, the goals that I individually hold very strongly, in that it's about all members of the team. Perfusion can't work in isolation, from the surgeons, from the anaesthetists, from the intensivists, from the nursing group. We all have to work together, because ultimately everybody is there for only one benefit, and that's the patient that we're operating on. So I just have a quick sidebar on what a clinical quality registry is, just to give that focus. It's a large database that collects, organises and reports all kinds of perfusion and perfusion related data. And by perfusion related data, we could talk about, we heard talking about monitoring cerebral oximetry, taking the anaesthetic data, taking the blood gas data. So it's pulling all of the related data together. And I like the schematic on the right-hand side of the slide here, simply because it puts data at the top of that cycle. And it doesn't really matter where that data, how the cycle is drawn. It always ends up saying exactly the same thing. We need to measure, we need to think about what we're doing, we need to relate it to knowledge, we need to make wise decisions about how we go forward. Act, do, plan, it's all in the same ilk in terms of ensuring that we develop and improve the practices that we're doing. In our registry site, submit their data to a central repository, and historically that's fed data back on an annual basis to allow for benchmarking, quality assurance and quality improvements. One of the underpinning features of our registry has been that all of the sites had electronic data, so that underpinned the entire collaboration. So if we move on to the next of these cartoon points that Hayley gave us at the beginning of the webinar, who? So who's involved in the implementation and assessment in terms of moving our data to making decisions? Well, it depends on the question. It depends on which part of the cycle you're at. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. We can do a lot as a perfusion team. We can focus very heavily on perfusion related activity, perfusion parameters, and improving the processes that we do. But there are other parts of what we do that we've got to remember. We work very strongly as a team. It might be that we're doing an initiative relating to deep sternal wound infection. Then we've got to pull the data from all the different aspects of the service to develop our improvement. Or it could be a much wider picture again. It could be through a collaboration. And I've got the ANZ CPR here. It could be an STS initiative. It could be a perform-related initiative. But they're all focused on improving the process by implementing a quality improvement, measuring, assessing, and improving. They all have the same structure in terms of trying to improve outcome. Within the ANZ CPR, we developed, and you'll notice at this stage it was called the Perfusion Down Under Collaboration. We set about developing benchmarks for a community. So rather than just developing within our own institution, we're now looking at developing over a number of different institutions. The same goal to develop the framework to allow continuous quality improvement. And we developed a number of different benchmarks, and we're able to develop reporting methods. And this is a slide demonstrating our traditional reporting methods, where we would report the quality indicators. On the left-hand side there, we have quality indicators at different sites. And on the right-hand side, we've got changes in quality indicators over time. The important thing you'll notice on the left-hand side is not all practices the same within a group. And whatever unit of measurement we use, be it hospital, be it region, be it perfusionist, we're always going to see that variation. It's going to relate to protocols within institutions. It's going to relate to how people interpret the literature, and it's going to relate to how individual practice varies. But the important thing is we need to be able to measure it and see it. Now, this webinar has a particular focus, if you will, on how does technology impact what we're doing. And as I said, right from, I guess, the implementation of the DMS system in 1999, we were able to integrate various aspects of the operating room, different parts of the hospital, blood gas machines, into our data management system, which allowed us a large body of data to incorporate into our practices. Now, as we moved with time, sorry, this is just a cartoon, if you will, to show all of the different streams of data that came into the cardiac surgery registry at that time. And you can see the strong focus here in the middle of the screen on the electronic perfusion data. And that was integrated with the other clinical data, which ultimately provides the resource to the clinical unit, underpinning the quality improvement cycles that were used continuously in our unit. We had a variety of different perfusion parameters that we established at various stages, and these are some of the very early ones that we put together. And these were the underpinning of our early perfusion quality reports. And these reports were actually emailed to the perfusionist at the time. And then you could have a series of meetings, I think they were bi-monthly, where we could discuss those and try and improve. When we moved to the collaborative perfusion registry, obviously our structures changed. Here I've taken a cartoon image of the heart-lung machine and the various apparatus in the operating room, and we're seeing them integrated into a national registry so we've gone from a single hospital system to multiple systems being able to share data and develop improvement. So that's a big step, to be able to have that electronic data available over multiple sites. And yes, continuing to improve in that space. We're currently working on transitioning our registry to the Essence data system as well. So what's the next phase of quality improvement? I think if we think about the whole continuous quality improvement cycle, you see that arrow of improvement in quality over time, and that's the thing. You're always on that journey. And for us, it's developing a better way of reporting. And when we think about what we're going to report and how we're going to report it, we have to think of some fundamental principles. And they are, if we're going to report a value to share amongst a community of people to underpin our improvement, it has to be measurable. We have to know that that measurement is reliable, that it's reproducible, and we have to understand the environment in which we're practicing. And that's really important, because it may be that it's a registry environment, it may be a group or company environment, so we're reporting to a different or feeding into a different system, or it could be a single centre where we're not part of a bigger group, but we need to work out systems that allow us to continually report and improve with our practice. So we need to make sure that our data is continually accessible. Now, with our ANZ CPR registry, as we move to a cloud-based registry, we've been working to develop better ways of reporting back to our members. And we've been working on a Power BI system of reporting. And I'm just going to share with you in the last few minutes of this presentation some of the areas that we're trying to develop and how we're trying to share our data in a more interactive manner. One of the big issues historically has been if we report data back, and in our case we're reporting annually, but it may be you're reporting quarterly, whatever, it's in a fixed format. And as a clinician, I can't say, oh, look, I want to see something else. It was always shared in a stock or a standard manner. Here you'll see a screen from our in development Power BI dashboard. And you'll see that up here on the left-hand side, you'll see there's a number of different categories. It can be hospital, case type, core or non-core, I'll come back to that, sex, perfusionist, race, etc. And on the right-hand side here, you'll see we've got a number of different quality indicators, and we can see different hospitals and different performance levels. If I were to, this isn't live, but if we were using the live version, I could click on this pink area and it would change to looking at the same data, but just for cabbage patients. What I have done is changed, focus now on just one specific quality indicator, and this is the RAP percentage by hospital. Now, we could change this and be looking at a single hospital and the RAP percentage by different perfusionists. So just let your mind wander through all the variables you can see at the top of the screen. And that's the way you could look at this data. Similarly, on the left-hand side, you'll see there's a time bar. So this is looking at a 5-year period, but we could change that and look at different periods. Here I've changed from looking at all cases to core cases. So in our collaboration, if we just go back to the previous slide, you'll see down here on the left-hand side all the different procedure types. And then when we move to the next one, it's a reduced group. This is now just coronary artery bypass surgery, valve surgery, and combined valve graft surgery. And you can see that in the core group, the compliance with RAP compared to the all-comer group. Now, if we look at the next slide, you'll see that I've changed from looking at both males and females to just females. And you can see that the RAP percentages at each of the institutions increased when we looked just at the female group. What we hadn't been able to do previously was drill down on an area of interest. And this can provide the stimulus to go in and do a whole project looking at some of these parameters. Here we are, we've changed the time period. So this is now saying, okay, looking at the current time period, how are we looking at in terms of our percentage of compliance with RAP? And then the last couple of slides are just showing the same data, but now we're looking at individual practices. And we can see some perfusionists are practicing RAP in all of their core cases, others less so. And we can start to ask the question, what are the drivers of these different practices? but we couldn't see this data from static reports. And in this final slide, we're looking not at RAP now, but we're looking at DO2 compliance with our benchmark numbers, and we're looking at AKI. We're not trying to show an association here. What we're doing is sharing the data at an individual level such that we as clinicians can start thinking about what we're doing, how we're practicing. We can see our data every day, however we want to see it. So I think it just opens the door to ask more and more questions. So I think this framework's really helped us walk our way through thinking about data and then driving our way to being able to make good clinical decisions. So with that, I thank you for your time. I think we're going to have some questions. This is a photo of, I've got a small piece of land in the Adelaide Hills, and this is just a nice restful way for me to spend my days. So thanks very much.
Lovely. Thank you, Rob. And I love the point that you made about not just gathering quality information, but really finding that feedback loop and sharing it back to the team. I think it's a great segue into one of the questions that we got from Chris, initially directed at Lori, but Rob would love to hear your perspective on this as well. Hi, Lori, great work here. Can you please describe how quality indicators have helped with demonstrating performance and consistency with your whole heart team, so surgeons and anesthesia as well?
So first, Rob, that was great. I loved actually seeing the numbers, and hopefully we can get to that point in the near future. So it's a great place to work towards. So I appreciate that. Our team is, I don't want to say it's unique, but we have a very special team where surgeons, perfusionists, anesthesiologists, we all work closely together in the OR. Our motto whenever we do a timeout is, if you see something, say something. So like the slide that I showed of all the parameters, so DO2, MAPS, hematocrits, all of those things, when any of those parameters are outside of what we've already set, we open the dialogue and we say, hey, this is our number. The surgeon says, well, what are your cerebral sats? What's your DO2? Do you think we can do anything else? What's your flow? Flow is big whenever it relates to all those things. And anesthesia will say, well, we're on this amount of pressors, or can you do this? And it's a collaborative effort every time we have one of those parameters that comes up. So we're very blessed in that way that everyone has input and we all work together for the best outcome for our patient during every case.
Great. Anything to add there, Rob?
Oh, look, I mean, I think it's just important to remember, that we just do need to continually focus on the data in the individual case is critical to be able to be seen and acted and responded to. And I think, Laurie's really been able to demonstrate how, as a unit that's moved from paper charting, has very quickly changed its mental window, if you will, to acknowledge and utilize the value of electronic data. It's very easy to think about electronic charting as a tool that sits over there on the other screen of your heart-lung machine. And if you consider that to be electronic data collection, you're missing the point. It's an integral part of the process. Back years ago, there was some really eloquent studies done where people showed how the perfusionist's eyes moved around the cockpit of the heart-lung machine. And I think if we redid those studies, we'd see that the perfusionist spends, within each probably 20-second cycle, a period of time looking at that data and flicking through the data along with every other aspect that we do. It is now a fully integrated and essential resource to deliver good cardiopulmonary bypass care.
So another question we had here, Dr. Baker, thank you for the insights. Can you speak to the importance of collecting higher frequency data in the field of outcomes research? The state of the literature seems to trend towards influencing area under or over the curve, which may point to an every moment matters concept.
Yep. Look, I think as part of our journey, we have been able to see the shortfalls of not taking all of the data at times. At one, we've gone through various, obviously we've had a long experience now with using heart-lung machine data. And one of the mistakes that you can make is you convert that data, or you create a quality indicator, if you will, and you don't necessarily look at the underlying data. And I think what Chris is relating to here is that it is the second by second, if you will, or the 10-second or the 20-second interval data that is incredibly important. I would argue that yes, and on our local database, we have available a area under the curve for DO2 for all of our patients. I'm not, excuse me, I'm still not sure exactly what the metric that we want to use to perfectly characterize DO2 is, but I do know that if we measure all the different variables related to DO2, and that's what Laurie showed us, she said, I think there was 4 different metrics that they were looking at in that GDP DO2 space, and there are other metrics we can look at. If we had George Justison with us, he'd be talking about, the VCO2 and VO2 ratio data and that sort of thing. So, we don't want to lock anything out. We need to be open to the fact that all data is important, and very much so we need to be collecting that high frequency data, because that will allow us to get the fidelity in what we're doing long term.
Another question came in. So Lori, for DO2I, I can pull this slide back up, but what indicators did you use in the values? So for lowest value, area under the curve, total time below. I can go back if you don't recall off the top of your head.
It's okay. So our DO2I, we keep it at 300 or above, and that's the threshold that was agreed upon between the literature and the surgeons and the perfusionists. That is the most recent literature, and that's the number we have chosen. So anytime it goes below that, and we have our settings very small on the scale. So 10 seconds is whenever we have a notification that goes off, so that we say, okay, something's out of range. Let's see what's going on. Other places may choose to do that at a larger parameter, but that gives us an early warning to say, hey, this is the issue, because that's something that we've already agreed upon as an important parameter for us. As soon as we go on bypass and we're at full flow, our surgeon's first question out of his mouth is, what's our DO2? Number one question, every single case. So we make sure we flow high. That's something that we do for all of our cases, and that our DO2 stays above 300. As far as the long-term parameters, like Rob was saying, we don't have a set number yet. I would look back at the papers from Oshita and Kramer to see what they recommend. And I mean, we could potentially ask Rob on his data as well and see where the numbers are settling out, but it is collective. So DO2 is an important part of it, but there's other parameters to look at as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the comment I'd make about the number, the numbers are a little bit misleading, and we don't necessarily know how generalizable they are for each situation. It depends on the equipment you're using. It depends on, to a degree, your monitoring systems. Depends on the formulas that those systems use. But what we've consistently seen in the literature is that we should be aiming for a higher DO2 rather than a low DO2. There's a very recent paper published in February of this year from a Japanese group, which has shown us that males and females may have different DO2 values. So that's something that we're going to really start to need to understand as a community. With the conversation around patient-directed perfusion has been going on for probably well over a decade now, probably 2 decades to be fair. Talking about, should we be looking at the pressure that the patient had before bypass, the pressure during bypass. And it's the same in the oxygen delivery GDP space. We need to take a lot of different things into account. And I think we're going to see that gender may well be one of those things that we need to take into account when we're looking at setting values. But we shouldn't be as totally fixed about that threshold value. That's where the area under the curve is good, because when we set a value of 300, how far under there do you dip? And you see that when you're looking at an area under the curve. And we should be trying to keep the deviations down as small as possible, reducing that variation, the time that patients are exposed to a high deficit of DO2.
Those are great points. I'd be very interested to take a look at that study. So thank you for bringing that up. Looks like we have time for just a few more questions. A question from Bob here. Lori, thanks for your insights and frank assessments. What would you say is the most critical stumbling point your team encountered in transitioning to Essence and the EMR system?
I would say number one issue as far as from a management side of things is trying to get the entire hospital system on board with the process. We're still working on getting IT to catch up with everything else. We got put on a list of projects last year, but IT is overwhelmed with a bunch of other projects. And so we're slated for hopefully a review in July. To see if we can get on the list for the upcoming year to hopefully integrate with network in the hospital and hopefully an Epic module. I would say the second thing is the procurement process. So making sure that you have an SBAR in place, any kind of data to back up why you need the new pumps. I submitted the end of life letters that we received from LivaNova for our S5s. And between all those things, it created a good case for moving forward with new pumps. But I think those were the two major stumbling blocks in the process. But overall, I mean, they're still workable things as far as, getting it in and getting it set up. As far as pumping cases go, everyone's happy with it. We'd like to have all of our data, but that's hopefully coming soon.
Good things for you to know, Rob, too, as you start on this journey.
Oh yeah, I think preparation of your case is key to getting your new pump systems. And you've got to, I think maybe the one thing you didn't emphasize there, Laurie, is you've got to start early because it takes a lot of time.
You should start at least a year or two early. I mean, it's a process.
Great.
Haley, that paper was by Oshita, Oshita,
Okay.
JTCVS, Open JTCS 2025.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any closing thoughts? Again, these were kind of the pillars that we built this conversation around, and as we wrap up here, just for our attendees to take away and how they can take the next step in moving towards a more data-driven program.
Well, my one would be just do it. You can't afford not to be collecting the data. You can't afford not to be looking at your data. It just underpins what we do as a profession. So that's how we improve.
I would also add that it's helpful to have your surgeons on board, because that's been a major driver for us as far as getting the systems in place and being more aware of your data. We have a surgeon who's leading quality programs, and that's a big thing for him, and this helps support that. So then we can actually have real data to show with everything else we're doing.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Lori. Thank you, Dr. Baker, and thank you, AMSECT, again for helping host this conversation. There are a few other questions that we may not have time to, or we won't have time to answer. A lot of thank yous in the chat. So again, thank you, everyone. This will be recorded and distributed. And if you have other questions, feel free to follow up with us directly.
Thank you.
Thank you.